Today we're diving into TCP UDP ports and protocols with 30 practice questions. If you missed the previous videos, don't worry. Check out the playlist in the description below, whether you're prepping for the CompTIA A+ exam or expanding your networking knowledge. Let's challenge your skills. Our first question is all about securely transferring files between two Linux servers. Imagine you're a system administrator and you need to do this task efficiently. Which protocol and port should be allowed in the firewall? A. TCP 22, B. UDP 53, C. TCP 389, D. UDP 67. What's your answer? Let's find out. To securely transfer files between two Linux servers, you should use TCP 22, A. This port is used by the Secure Shell SSH protocol, providing a secure channel for transferring files between servers. It's the perfect choice for maintaining confidentiality and integrity during file transfers. The other options wouldn't suit this task. UDP 53, B is used for domain name system, DNS queries, not file transfers. TCP 389, C is used for lightweight directory access protocol, LDAP connections, not file transfers. UDP 67, D is used for dynamic host configuration protocol, DHCP server communications, again, not for file transfers. Moving on to question number 2, a technician is troubleshooting connectivity issues accessing a web server. Which port needs to be open to allow access to the web server? A. 25, B. 53, C. 80D, 443. Let's hear your choice. To access a web server, you need to have port 80, C, open. This port is used for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP communication, which is the standard protocol for transmitting web content between a web server and a web client. The other options wouldn't do the trick. Port 25, A, is used for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, SMTP communication, not web server access. Port 53, B, is used for DNS queries, not web server access. Port 443D is used for secure HTTP, HTTPS communication, not the regular HTTP used for web servers. Now let's dive into file and print sharing. Users report slowness accessing files on a file server. Which ports use TCP for file and print sharing? A. 135, 139B, 161, 162C, 389D, 445. What's your take on this? For file and print sharing using TCP, you should use ports 135, 139A, and 445D. These ports are associated with Server Message Block, SMB communication, which is a protocol used for file and printer sharing on Windows networks. The other options aren't quite right. Ports 161, 162B are used for Simple Network Management Protocol, SNMP communication, not file and print sharing. Port 389C is used for LDAP connections, not file and print sharing. Our fourth question delves into central authentication using LDAP. A company wants to implement it, but which TCP port should be open on the LDAP server? A. 389, B. 443, C. 3389, D. 8080. What's your call on this? To implement central authentication using LDAP, you should open TCP port 389A on the LDAP server. LDAP is a protocol used for accessing and managing directory services, and it typically uses TCP port 389 for communication. The other options don't fit the bill. Port 443B is used for HTTPS communication, not LDAP. Port 3389C is used for Remote Desktop Protocol, RDP, communication, not LDAP. Port 8080D is often used as an alternative HTTP port, not for LDAP. Moving on to the next question. An administrator needs to allow DHCP traffic on a network. Which protocol and port should be permitted? A. TCP 67B, TCP 68C, UDP 67D. UDP 68, what's your answer? Let's see. To allow DHCP traffic on a network, you should permit UDP 67C for the DHCP server and UDP 68D for the DHCP client. DHCP is a protocol used for automatically assigning IP addresses and other communication parameters to devices connected to a network. It uses a connectionless service model and relies on the User Datagram Protocol UDP for communication. The other options aren't correct. TCP 67A and TCP 68B are not used for DHCP communication. Next up, we have a question about forwarding DNS queries to the ISP's DNS servers. For this, a small home office, SOHO router needs to configure which UDP port, A25B, 53C, 88D, 123, what's your pick? To forward DNS queries to the ISP's DNS servers, a SOHO router needs to configure UDP port 53. B. DNS is a protocol used to translate domain names into IP addresses, and it typically uses UDP port 53 for communication. The other options aren't the right choices. Port 25A is used for SMTP communication, not DNS queries. Port 88C is used for Kerberos authentication, not DNS queries. Port 123D is used for Network Time Protocol (NTP) communication, not DNS queries. Now let's talk secure network management. A network administrator needs to manage routers securely from a central location. Which protocol should be enabled? A. DHCP, B. HTTPS-C, SNMP, D. SH. What's your call on this one? To manage routers securely from a central location, you should enable the SSH protocol, D. SSH is a secure protocol used for remote management of network devices, providing encrypted communication between the administrator and the device. The other options aren't suitable for this task. DHCP A is used for automatically assigning IP addresses, not for secure network management. HTTPS B is used for secure web communication, not for managing routers. SNMP C is used for monitoring and managing network devices, but doesn't offer the same level of security as SH. Time for a question about email servers. Email messages from a mail server are being rejected as spam by recipients. Which port should be open for outgoing SMTP traffic? A. 22B, 25C, 110D, 143. What's your answer? Let's find out. To allow outgoing SMTP traffic, you should open port 25. B. SMTP is a protocol used for sending email messages between mail servers, and it typically uses TCP port 25 for communication. The other options wouldn't fix the issue. Port 22A is used for SSH communication, not for outgoing SMTP traffic. Port 110C is used for Post Office Protocol 3, POP3 communication, not SMTP. Port 143D is used for Internet Message Access Protocol, IMAP communication, not SMTP. Next up, we have a question about secure remote access. Remote users need to securely access the corporate network over the internet. Which port should be open for VPN traffic? A. 53, B. 88C, 443D, 3389. What's your take on this? To allow VPN traffic, you should open port 443C. This port is used for Secure Sockets Layer, SSL VPNs, which provide secure remote access to a corporate network over the internet. The other options aren't the right fit. Port 53A is used for DNS queries, not for VPN traffic. Port 88B is used for Kerberos authentication, not for VPN traffic. Port 3389D is used for RDP communication, not for VPN traffic. Let's move on to connecting remotely to a school library database. A university student needs to do this task. Which port and protocol should be allowed? A. TCP 23B, UDP 53C, TCP 80D, UDP 88. What's your answer? Let's find out. To allow a university student to connect remotely to the school library database, you should allow TCP port 80C. This port is used for HTTP communication, which is the standard protocol for transmitting web content between a web server and a web client. The other options wouldn't give the desired result. TCP port 23A is used for Telnet communication, not for connecting to the database. UDP port 53B is used for DNS queries, not for connecting to the database. UDP port 88D is used for Kerberos authentication, not for connecting to the database. Our next question revolves around secure file transfers. A network technician needs to configure a firewall to allow them. Which protocol and port should be allowed? A. TCP 2021B, TCP 22C, TCP 23D, UDP 53. What's your call on this? To allow secure file transfers, you should allow TCP 22B. This port is used by the Secure File Transfer Protocol, SFTP, which is an extension of the Secure Shell, SSH protocol, and provides a secure channel for transferring files between servers. The other options aren't the best choices. TCP 2021A is used for File Transfer Protocol, FTP communication, which is not secure. TCP 23C is used for Telnet communication, which is also not secure. UDP 53D is used for DNS queries, not for file transfers. Next up, we have a question about enabling remote desktop connections to a Windows server. Which protocol and port should be used for this purpose? A. TCP 23, B. TCP 3389, C. UDP 161, D. UDP 389. What's your answer? Let's find out. To enable remote desktop connections to a Windows server, you should use TCP 3389. B. This port is used for Remote Desktop Protocol, RDP, communication, allowing users to remotely access and control a Windows server. The other options aren't the correct choices. TCP 23A is used for Telnet communication, not for remote desktop connections. UDP 161C is used for Simple Network Management Protocol, SNMP communication, not for remote desktop connections. UDP 389D is used for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, LDAP communication, not for remote desktop connections. Our 13th question is all about troubleshooting website access. A user is unable to access a website using HTTPS. Which port should be checked for connectivity issues? A. TCP 80B, TCP 443C, UDP 53D, UDP 67. What's your call on this one? To access a website using HTTPS, you should check for connectivity issues on TCP 443B. This port is used for secure HTTP, HTTPS communication, encrypting the data transmitted between a web server and a web client. The other options wouldn't solve the problem. TCP 80A is used for regular HTTP communication, not for HTTPS. UDP 53C is used for DNS queries, not for accessing websites over HTTPS. UDP 67D is used for DHCP server communications, not for accessing websites. Next, let's talk about managing network devices. A company wants to monitor them using a protocol that allows for both read and write access. Which protocol and port should be used? A. TCP 161, B. TCP 389, C. UDP 161D, UDP 389. What's your answer? Let's find out. To monitor network devices with read and write access, you should use UDP 161C. This port is used for Simple Network Management Protocol (SNMP) communication, which is a protocol for managing and monitoring network devices. The other options aren't the right choices. TCP 161A is not used for SNMP communication. TCP 389B is used for LDAP communication, not for SNMP. UDP 389D is not used for SNMP communication either. Next up, we have a question about configuring a mail server for email using IMAP. Which port should be opened on the firewall? A. TCP 25, B. TCP 110C, TCP 143D, UDP 53. What's your take on this one? To configure a mail server to receive email using IMAP, you should open TCP port 143C on the firewall. IMAP is a protocol used for accessing and managing email messages on a mail server, and it typically uses TCP port 143 for communication. The other options wouldn't work. TCP port 25A is used for SMTP communication, not for receiving email with IMAP. TCP port 110B is used for Post Office Protocol 3 POP3 communication, not for IMAP. UDP port 53D is used for DNS queries, not for email communication. Our 16th question deals with troubleshooting DNS resolution. A technician needs to troubleshoot a network issue related to DNS resolution. Which port should be checked for connectivity issues? A. TCP 53, B. UDP 53, C. TCP 80D, UDP 67. What's your call on this one? To troubleshoot a network issue related to DNS resolution, you should check for connectivity issues on UDP 53B. DNS is a protocol used to translate domain names into IP addresses, and it typically uses UDP port 53 for communication. The other options wouldn't fix the problem. TCP 53A is used for DNS zone transfers, not for DNS resolution. TCP 80C is used for HTTP communication, not for DNS resolution. UDP 67D is used for DHCP server communications, not for DNS resolution. Next, we have a question about implementing a protocol for managing network devices with a connectionless communication method. Which protocol should be used? A. TCP, B. UDP, C. SNMP, D. SHH. What's your answer? Let's find out. To implement a protocol for managing network devices with a connectionless communication method, you should use UDP. B. UDP is a connectionless protocol that is often used for network management tasks due to its low overhead and fast communication. The other options aren't the right choices. TCP A is a connection-oriented protocol, not connectionless. SNMP C is a protocol for managing network devices, but it doesn't specify the communication method. SHD is a secure protocol for remote management of network devices, and it uses TCP, a connection-oriented protocol. Let's talk about directory services. An administrator needs to configure a server to use LDAP. Which port should be opened on the firewall? A. TCP 389, B. TCP 443, C. UDP 389D, UDP 445. What's your take on this one? To configure a server to use LDAP for directory services, you should open TCP 389 A on the firewall. LDAP is a protocol used for accessing and managing directory services, and it typically uses TCP port 389 for communication. The other options wouldn't give the desired result. TCP 443 B is used for HTTPS communication, not for LDAP. UDP 389 C is not used for LDAP communication. UDP 445 D is used for server message block SMB communication, not for LDAP. Our 19th question revolves around accessing a file server using SMB. Which protocol and port should be checked for connectivity issues? A. TCP 135B, TCP 445C, UDP 137D, UDP 138. What's your answer? Let's find out. To access a file server using SMB, you should check for connectivity issues on TCP port 445B. SMB is a protocol used for file and printer sharing on Windows networks, and it typically uses TCP port 445 for communication. The other options wouldn't solve the issue. TCP port 135A is used for remote procedure call (RPC) communication, not for SMB. UDP port 137C is used for NetBIOS name service communication, not for SMB. UDP port 138D is used for NetBIOS datagram service, not for SMB. Next up, we have a question about remote management of network devices using a secure protocol. Which protocol and port should be allowed? A. TCP 22, B. TCP 23C, UDP 161D, UDP 162. What's your call on this one? To configure a firewall to allow remote management of network devices using an encrypted protocol, you should allow TCP port 22A. This port is used by the Secure Shell (SSH) protocol, which provides a secure channel for remote management of network devices. SSH encrypts the data transmitted between the administrator and the device, ensuring confidentiality and integrity. The other options aren't the best choices. TCP port 23B is used for Telnet communication, which is not encrypted. UDP port 161C is used for SNMP communication, not for secure remote management. UDP port 162D is used for SNMP traps, not for secure remote management. We have a question about secure remote access to network devices. A network administrator needs to configure a firewall to allow secure remote access. Which protocol and port should be allowed? A. TCP 22, B. TCP 23, C. UDP 161, D. UDP 389. What's your take on this? Let's find out. To allow secure remote access to network devices, you should allow TCP 22A. This port is used by the Secure Shell (SSH) protocol, providing a secure channel for remote management of network devices. SSH ensures the confidentiality and integrity of data transmitted between the administrator and the devices. The other options wouldn't give the desired result. TCP 23B is used for Telnet communication, which is not encrypted and therefore not secure for remote access. UDP 161C is used for Simple Network Management Protocol (SNMP) communication, not for secure remote access. UDP 389D is used for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol (LDAP) communication, not for remote access. Let's talk about secure email communication. An administrator wants to enable SSL/TLS for emails. Which protocol and port should be used for this purpose? A. TCP 25B, TCP 110C, TCP 143D, TCP 993. What's your answer? Let's find out. To enable SSL/TLS for secure email communication, you should use TCP 993-D for IMAP communication. IMAP over SSL/TLS encrypts the data transmitted between a mail server and a mail client, ensuring secure email access. The other options aren't the best fit. TCP 25A is used for SMTP communication, not for SSL/TLS secured email. TCP 110B is used for POP3 communication, not for SSL/TLS secured email. TCP 143C is used for unencrypted IMAP communication, not for SSL/TLS. Next up, we have a question about web server access. A technician needs to configure a firewall to allow access to a web server using HTTP. Which port should be opened on the firewall? A. TCP 21, B. TCP 80, C. UDP 53, D. UDP 67. What's your call on this one? To allow access to a web server using HTTP, you should open TCP port 80B on the firewall. This port is used for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP communication, enabling web clients to access web content from the server. The other options wouldn't solve the issue. TCP 21A is used for FTP communication, not for web server access. UDP 53C is used for DNS queries, not for web server access. UDP 67D is used for DHCP server communications, not for web server access. Time to test your knowledge of file transfer protocols. A company wants to implement a protocol for transferring files between servers without encryption. Which protocol and port should be used? A. TCP 20 and 21, B. TCP 22, C. TCP 23, D. UDP 53. What's your answer? Let's find out. To implement a protocol for transferring files between servers without encryption, you should use TCP 2021A. These ports are used for the File Transfer Protocol, FTP, which facilitates file transfers between servers and clients on a network. The other options wouldn't fit the requirement. TCP 22B is used for secure remote management via SH, not for unencrypted file transfers. TCP 23C is used for Telnet communication, not for file transfers. UDP 53D is used for DNS queries, not for file transfers. Let's dive into email server configuration. An administrator needs to configure a mail server to send emails using SMTP. Which port should be opened on the firewall? A. TCP 25, B. TCP 110C, TCP 143D, UDP 53. What's your take on this one? To configure a mail server to send emails using SMTP, you should open TCP port 25A on the firewall. SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, is the standard protocol used for sending email between mail servers, and it typically uses port 25 for communication. The other options aren't the right choices. TCP 110B is used for POP3 communication, not for sending emails via SMTP. TCP 143C is used for IMAP communication, not for SMTP. UDP 53D is used for DNS queries, not for email communication. Our 26th question revolves around NetBIOS name resolution troubleshooting. A network technician needs to troubleshoot a network issue related to NetBIOS name resolution. Which port should be checked for connectivity issues? A. TCP 137B, UDP 137C, TCP 139, D. UDP 139. What's your call on this one? To troubleshoot a network issue related to NetBIOS name resolution, you should check for connectivity issues on UDP port 137B. NetBIOS, Network Basic Input-Output System, is a legacy protocol used for communication between computers on a local network, and it uses port 137 for the NetBIOS name service, NBNS. The other options wouldn't solve the problem. TCP 137A and TCP 139C are used for NetBIOS session service, not for name resolution. UDP 139D is used for NetBIOS datagram service, not for name resolution. Next, we have a question about managing network devices. A company wants to implement a protocol for managing network devices that uses a connection-oriented communication method. Which protocol should be used? A, TCP, B, UDP, C, SNMP, D, SSH. What's your answer? Let's find out. To implement a protocol for managing network devices using a connection-oriented communication method, you should use TCP A. TCP, Transmission Control Protocol, provides reliable and ordered delivery of data packets between network devices. It establishes a connection before data transmission and ensures that all packets are received in the correct order. The other options wouldn't give the desired result. UDP-B is a connectionless protocol, not connection-oriented. SNMP-C is a protocol for managing network devices, but it doesn't specify the communication method. SSH-D is a secure protocol for remote management of network devices, and it uses TCP, a connection-oriented protocol. Let's talk about remote desktop access. An administrator needs to configure a server to use RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol. Which port should be opened on the firewall? A. TCP 3389B, TCP 443C, UDP 3389D, UDP 445. What's your call on this one? To configure a server to use RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, for remote desktop access, you should open TCP port 3389A on the firewall. RDP is a proprietary protocol developed by Microsoft for remote access to Windows-based systems. By allowing incoming connections on port 3389, the server can accept RDP connections from remote clients, enabling users to access the server's desktop remotely. The other options wouldn't fit the requirement. TCP 443B is used for HTTPS communication, not for RDP. UDP 3389C is not used for RDP. UDP 445D is used for SMB server message block communication, not for RDP. Time to test your knowledge of accessing a file server using CIFS. A user is unable to access a file server using CIFS. Which protocol and port should be checked for connectivity issues? A. TCP 135, B. TCP 445C, UDP 137D, UDP 138. What's your answer? Let's find out. To access a file server using CIFS, Common Internet File System, you should check for connectivity issues on TCP port 445B. CIFS is a protocol used for file sharing and accessing network resources in Windows environments, and it relies on SMB, server message block communication, which uses port 445. The other options wouldn't solve the issue. TCP 135A is used for RPC, remote procedure call communication, not for CIFS. UDP 137C is used for NetBIOS name service, not for CIFS. UDP 138D is used for NetBIOS datagram service, not for CIFS. Last but not least, we have a question about the remote management of network devices using an encrypted protocol. A network technician needs to configure a firewall to allow this remote management. Which protocol and port should be allowed? A. TCP 22, B. TCP 23C, UDP 161D, UDP 162. What's your call on this one? To allow remote management of network devices using an encrypted protocol, you should allow TCP port 22A. This port is used by the Secure Shell (SSH) protocol, providing a secure channel for remote management of network devices. SH encrypts the data transmitted between the administrator and the device, ensuring confidentiality and integrity. The other options wouldn't be the best fit. TCP 23B is used for Telnet communication, which is not encrypted and therefore not secure. UDP 161C is used for SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol communication, not for secure remote management. UDP 162D is used for SNMP traps, not for secure remote management. That wraps up our TCP and UDP Ports and Protocols practice questions. I hope you enjoyed the quiz and found it helpful for your CompTIA A+ core exam preparation. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in future videos, feel free to leave them in the comments below. We value your feedback. Remember to like this video if you found it helpful, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming content. Thanks for watching, and best of luck with your exam. Happy studying.